If there's one thing that people often tell me when I ask them like how is their game dev journey going, it's excuses. It's reasons why they haven't started with game development yet, even though we're living in a time where it has never been easier to download an engine and to get started on working on your first kinds of games. So in this video, I want to dispel 5 myths that I often hear from beginning developers or people who are like considering starting game development but are too afraid to take that first plunge about why they shouldn't become game developers because it's too hard or whatever. Or let's just immediately jump into the first one. They feel like they can't become game developers because in the name it kind of says game developer. So they get the idea that they need to be good programmers first before they can get into game development. And this isn't true. Maybe if they watch too much YouTube and like devlogs and whatever, they get the idea that they need to write their own engine from scratch for their first game or they're absolute losers. That's not the case. And even then, maybe an engine like Unity or Godot can still be very daunting because it's still code-based. And if you've never written a line of code before in your life, I'm gonna be honest, those are not the most approachable engines. You will immediately have to commit a lot of time into a long tutorial to really just learn programming from scratch. But there are other things you can do. There are other engines, and I just want to give them like some love as well. Like Construct Tree, I know we've clowned on it a lot, but if you're someone who just wants to begin with basic game development and who doesn't need like ultra realistic 3D graphics for your game idea, or even things like Game Maker Studio, where sure, there is still some programming, but it's much more abstracted and easy. These are very good beginner-friendly approaches. And if you are really like, no, I need to have like AAA level graphics because I am an artist first and a like programmer second, then look into something like Unreal even, where you have the blueprints and sure, it's more technical already, but it's still relatively close to a drag and drop approach to game development. So don't let the fact that there's developer in the name of game developer scare you. Even if you're making a game that is somewhat mechanically complex, code is still gonna be like at most 20 or 30% of the entire game development experience. There's still things like art, marketing, sound design, actually making the game fun and just managing the development of the game that is going to be extremely important as well. And these things can honestly, depending on the genre, be even more important than being able to program well. Another one I hear that I find kind of funny is that people think that, oh, I'm like 50 years old, I'm 40 years old. Game dev is currently filled with all those young whippersnappers who are just sitting in their room and like programming all day, working on their game. There's no way I can compete with them. It's more of a young people thing. And I have to be honest, this is very funny. I always thought that the audience of this YouTube channel was people like me, you know, like 20 to 25-year-old, like people who have interest in programming, who grew up playing games and who now want to learn making games. But the first time I actually looked at the channel analytics of the average demographic and gender of this channel, I learned that like all of you are like sweaty dudes that are like 30, 40 plus years old, and you're making solid games as well. Because you need to remember that you have one key advantage over all those young whippersnappers like me, and that is the fact that you have a stable life already. Sure, there are a lot of people who are like 18 to 20 years old and who try to get into game development, but we don't have the life experience most of the time or the like financial stability to actually go in more all in, to actually work on our games for longer periods of time without just crashing and burning because, oh, guess we'll never buy a house. I mean, we're never buying a house in this economy anyway, but if you're spending all of your time on purely game development, you're not going to be earning a lot of money when you're starting out at the beginning, which is a reason that a lot of young developers to just like wash out. So there is no such thing as being too old for game development. We still have people who are like 60 plus years old who are retired and who are now finally trying to dip their feet into the game development world. Age can only be an advantage, in my opinion, the older you are, than being young. I've actually talked about some more of the advantages of being an older and more experienced game dev in another video that you can watch over there if you want to learn more about that. And then this next one is kind of my fault partially, and it is that it's like, why should I bother making my game? It's going to be impossible to stand out in this current landscape of game development. And you're not completely wrong. I looked at the stats. Since 2024 started, so 4 full months basically from now, 4,000 games have been released on Steam with the indie tag, which is honestly a bonkers number. That is like 5% of the entire Steam catalog has just been released in 4 months basically. So you are correct. It is going to be harder to stand out, but it's not going to be impossible. There are still a lot of success stories. A recent one, for example, is Rusty's Retirement, which is a very chill, casual game made on the side, which has become a massive success. The thing, of course, you need to remember is you won't get free marketing. You will still need to find ways to get it, and there are definitely factors like the genre and the art style, which will greatly impact how well you'll be able to market your game. That's why I always say don't make a 2D platform, because that is going to be a bit of a dead on arrival approach in terms of marketing. But that is something that you can't just disband from the moment you want to start game development. You only can tell really, is this game going to have some potential, yes or no, once you're already a little bit into the game development process and you've gotten some first feedback. And there's no point in you making these excuses right now, very early on in development, about, oh, I'm not going to be able to sell my game, when I can still guarantee you that if you just make the game, you'll still sell more copies than if you just sit behind your computer and whine about there not being any way to market anymore and not make your game. Because then, of course, yeah, you will sell 0 copies and you won't have made a game, and you'll regret it probably for a long time that, wish I should have actually gone into game development after all. This next one is kind of tied into the first one of, oh, I need to be able to program, and that is the opposite of, there is no point in me learning game development anymore, because with things like the dev and AI, games will just be made automated and there will be no point in me being there anymore. By the time that I've learned the skills to actually make the game, AI will have overtaken everything. There's no point in learning 3D modeling and programming or whatever. And I think that is a pretty head in the sand approach as well, because if you've actually ever tried any of those AI products, they're still very far from being production ready, and some, depending on like the specific kind of AI thing you're working with, like 3D modeling, they're like not even in like beta testing mode ready, basically. I like to compare it with self-driving cars as well. For the past like 20 plus years, car manufacturers have been working towards like more and more automated driving. But still, 20 years later, there is still barely any good self-driving cars out there. If you've ever watched like one of those Tesla videos, they just like die most of the time. And it's very much similar with game development. Also, you need to remember that games are played by humans and humans want fun. And we are not at a point yet where a computer model can determine what is fun, what is a creative vision. Those are things that they will need you for. They can't invent new stuff. They can just mix together other stuff, but you are still going to be there as a game designer. And yeah, hopefully, honestly, it gets easier to program games. Who doesn't want to spend less time on debugging their code for some reason? But it's not going to replace you. Because especially, like I said, that game design is always going to be done by humans, unless your game is going to be some like a game mill Android mobile game, ASMR hyper casual game. Sure, those may be AI automated at some point, but I think those are not the kind of games you want to make if this is a channel that you're watching, because we don't really cover that form of game development, game marketing, whatever. And then the last one that I also hear is that, oh, I can only make a successful game if I quit my main job like I did and go full in on game development, and then my development will be much faster, I'll have a better time to market, and I'll just be more successful. That's something that I also see in comments, for example, of people who are like, damn, you guys made this in like 2-3 months, whereas I've been working on my own game for the past 2 years and I barely see any improvement. But I think you're missing the point there a bit, because quitting your job, honestly, I think it's objectively stupid to do if you're a game developer. I'm gonna be honest, like what I did, it is not something I recommend to a lot of people. There's a lot more context and background you need to keep in mind about why I went full-time into game development. And generally the people who do quit their jobs to pursue game development full-time, they're somewhat risk tolerant. Maybe they've already paid off their house, or they have a spouse that is earning a lot of money, or like me, they have a 2-3 year long runway that they don't immediately need to worry about having to sell their games immediately. If you are planning on quitting your job and you have to release a commercially viable game in like 4 to 6 months, that's dumb. Don't do that. Don't even bother. And I would even dare to say that quitting your job to go full-time can actually be detrimental to your game development, because you are going to be more stressed and more pressured about your game having to release sooner rather than later, because you're going to need income at some point, which will mean that, hey, your game's quality may actually suffer, not improve from the extra time. Also, a lot of people, they're simply not ready, if you ask me, to go full-time on game development and have to manage their own time and energy. Let's just first start with figuring out if you can even just work 1 to 2 hours a day on your game before you actually consider going full-time, because managing yourself is actually going to be one of the hardest parts of going full-time as a game developer, let alone the actual game development stuff. So all of this is to say that, hey, whatever excuse you have, you shouldn't be scared to get into game development. It is getting easier and easier with the day. Hell, Brecky's returned, which is basically like the second coming of Christ at this point, making game development more approachable. Game dev is growing for indies and like smaller studios. It's getting easier. There shouldn't really be any reason for you not to dip your toes in the water. Of course, don't go in expecting your first game to be Stardew Valley. That's something that we say a lot on this channel. That is not going to happen either, but that shouldn't be your main goal to get into game development. You generally want to share some fun, you want to share a unique concept you have, or there was like this game that you had played 20 years ago that nobody seems to have remade for the modern world, so you're going to be the change that the world needs. If those are some of the reasons that you want to get into game development, really, there is no reason why you shouldn't do it. Are there any other reasons why you are like too scared to get into game development? Let me know in the comments down below and I'll see if I can like debunk them there as well. I'm really interested to hear what you guys are thinking as well. Apart from that, if you're new here, we make 2 videos every week about game development, about our own game dev journey, how we're making our own games, and just the things we learn along the way. So if that's something that interests you, be sure to head down below and subscribe, as it really helps us out as well. That's all I had to say. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!